A flash, and the ground opened to reveal hell. The screaming, tortured faces of the damned, concentric circles of pain, in each one a new, deeper, darker torment, all tied to the sins of the once living, skinning, crushing, devouring oneself. But the worst was the small, simple, stone cell, regret. Michael couldn't breathe. This was impossible. This wasn't... The window to their left shattered inward. Except it wasn't glass. It was reality itself cracking. For just a moment, Michael saw the man's true form reflected there. Wings like burnt parchment, tattered at the edges. Face of horrible beauty, corrupted and twisted. Eyes that burned with ancient fury. Something that had been an angel once. The most beautiful thing in creation. Now warped beyond recognition. That it was gone. The man, Satan, was just a bloke in a nice suit again. Michael managed. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want you. Satan's voice was flat. I really, truly, genuinely don't want you. You're a crap sinner. But let me explain something about how this works. Satan leaned forward. I collect sinners. The wicked, the cruel, the ones who choose evil over and over. People who hurt others for pleasure. People who destroy lives for profit. People who look at suffering and decide to create more of it. I hurt those fuckers. It's so fun. He gestured to the cracked window, and Michael saw glimpses. Souls in torment, demons, endless caverns of screaming. They belong there. They earned it. They chose it through action after action after action. Hell is justice for them. It's what they deserve. Satan's grin faded. But you're just pathetic, broken, just tired, just hurt. You lost faith because a little girl died and you couldn't save her. Boo-hoo-hoo! And now you're planning suicide because your feelings have a boo-boo. Not because you're wicked. He shook his head. You don't belong in hell, Hayes. You belong in heaven, and it pisses me off that you're about to throw that away. Why do you care? Because it's a waste. Satan's voice rose, genuine frustration breaking through. I've been collecting souls for millennia, and most of them deserve it. But every so often I get one who doesn't. Someone who makes one stupid choice in a moment of despair and dooms themselves forever. And I have to take them because those are the rules. Stood abruptly. The lights went out completely. When they came back on, the carriage was gone. Michael was standing in darkness. No, not darkness. Dim red light, like dying coals. Let me show you what you're choosing. Satan's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Let me show you what happens if you jump. He grabbed the priest by the neck, nails digging. The tunnel walls began to change, to melt, to open up into something vast. Michael screamed. He was standing on a precipice overlooking an impossible cavern. Stretched down and down and down, so far that the bottom was lost in red mist and smoke. The heat hit him like a physical force, not the clean heat of fire, but something worse, something that smelled of burning meat and sulfur and human waste and rotting flesh all at once. And the sounds, God, the sounds! Screaming, millions of voices beyond... maybe billions, all screaming at once. Not the quick scream of sudden pain, but the endless, grinding scream of agony that never stops, never lessens, never becomes bearable. Screams of people who had been screaming for centuries and would scream for eternity. Welcome to my kingdom, cool it? Satan said from beside him. He still looked at the man in the suit. impossibly casual against the horror around them. Proper look, yeah? No tourist, sanitized version. The real deal. Michael couldn't look away. The cavern was carved into levels, circles descending deeper and deeper, and on each level, souls were being torn apart. On the nearest level, Michael saw a man strapped to a table made of what looked like obsidian. A wooden pole covered in what looked like broken glass penetrating his rectum. Demons surrounded him, twisted into mockeries of beauty. One had too many limbs, all ending in surgical instruments. Another had a face split vertically, each half grinning independently. They were skinning the man, slowly, methodically peeling strips of flesh from his body, while he screamed and thrashed, blood pooling. But the worst part, the part that made Michael's stomach heave, was that the flesh grew back. Soon as they peeled a strip away, new skin formed, nerve endings and all, ready to be flayed again. That's Marcus, Satan said unconservationally. Serial killer. 12 women. Great work. Tortured him for days before killing him. Thought he was clever. Thought he'd never get caught. His East London accent was jarring against the screams. He gets skinned alive every day. Been going on for about 300 years now. He'll be going for 3 billion more. And then 3 trillion. And it never ends, mate. Never. The poll is a new addition. I got bored. Michael tried to close his eyes, but found he couldn't. Satan was making him watch. Keep looking. You need to see what you're choosing. On the next level down, a woman was suspended by hooks through her shoulders, spinning slowly over a spit of fire. But it wasn't normal fire. It was a cold fire. Fire that burned without light, that hurt in ways that physical flame couldn't. Her mouth was open in a constant scream, but no sound came out. Her vocal cords had been severed. Satan appeared next to her, pushing her slightly so she swung a little as she rotated. That's Jennifer, Satan said. Back Michael now. Drowned her 3 kids in the bathtub because they were cramping her style. Never repented. Thought she'd get away with it. He grinned. The silent scream is my favorite bit. She screams and screams, but can't hear herself. Can't get any relief from vocalizing the pain. Just silent agony forever. Michael felt vomit rise in his throat. Keep watching. Next level was worse. A massive wheel, like something from a medieval torture chamber, but impossibly large. Hundreds of bodies were chained to it, and as it turned, they were crushed against stone. Bones breaking, organs rupturing, skulls cracking. Then the wheel turned further, and they healed instantly, completely, just in time to be crushed again. So much fun! Satan shouted. Child abusers, he said simply. All of them. Priests, teachers, parents, people who were supposed to protect kids and diddled them instead. They get crushed, healed, crushed again. The pain never dulls. The body never adapts. Every time feels like the first. Michael was shaking. Please, stop. I can't, mate. You need to see this. Satan's voice was harder now. You need to understand what you're throwing yourself into. On the next level, demons were forcing souls to eat their own organs, pulling out intestines and making them chew, swallow, digest. Then the organs would regenerate and the process would start again. Souls were vomiting and crying and begging, but the demons just laughed. Sounds like breaking glass and screaming metal. Gluttons, Satan said. People who hoarded food while others starved. CEOs kept their workers in poverty. Billionaires who watched people die of hunger and did nothing. They eat themselves now, forever. I kick 'em every so often for something to do. Lower still, Michael saw souls being torn apart by other souls. Humans ripping each other with teeth and nails, tearing flesh, breaking bones, gouging eyes. And the worst part was the expressions. They hated each other. Pure, absolute hatred that would never fade, never be satisfied, never end. They would torture each other for eternity and never stop wanting to. Genocides, Satan said. Mass murderers. People who stoked hatred and watched the world burn. Now they burn together. And they hate each other so much. They'll never stop, never tire, never find peace. Just endless violence and endless hate. Michael was crying now. Please, I understand. I understand. Nah, you don't. Not yet. Satan grabbed his shoulder and his grip was like iron, because you haven't seen where you'd go. The world shifted, and they were suddenly on a different level, higher up, away from the worst torments, but it was still hell. A man sat in a small stone room. He wasn't being actively tortured. He was just sitting, staring at the wall. That's Thomas, Satan said. Jumped off a bridge in 1847. Depressed. Lost his wife to tuberculosis. That's a great death. Coughing, blood, the works. Good man otherwise. Lived a decent life. One bad choice. Michael watched. The man wasn't moving, just sitting, staring. Doesn't look so bad, does it? Satan's grin was terrible. Keep watching. Michael looked. The man's face was wet with tears. His lips were moving, forming words over and over. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's all he does, Satan said softly. Sits there, thinks about what he lost. Heaven is right there, just beyond reach, and he knows it. Knows he could have had it. Knows he threw it away for one moment of despair that passed. Wife in heaven, waiting for him, and he knows he'll never see her again. The man's face suddenly contorted in anguish. He screamed, really screamed, and began clawing at the walls. His nails broke and bled, but the wounds healed instantly, and he kept clawing, kept screaming, kept sobbing. That happens every few hours, Satan explained. The full realization hits him again, the weight of what he lost, the knowledge that it never ends, and he breaks down completely, and he goes numb all for the while. Then it hits him again, forever. Satan pointed to another cell, another suicide. This one was a woman, young, maybe 25. She was banging her head against the wall over and over, trying to knock herself unconscious, blood everywhere. But she couldn't. There was no unconsciousness here, no sleep, no rest, no escape. That's where you'd go, Satan said. His London accent was gone, replaced by something ancient and terrible. Not the worst torments, not the flaying or the fire, just that endless awareness of what you threw away. Endless regret. Endless knowledge that heaven was yours and you chose this instead. He spun Michael around to face him. And I'd have you watch for being a sad sack. Have you listen to sobbing and apologizing for the next trillion years. And it pisses me off, Michael, 'cause you don't belong here. You earned heaven. You worked for it. You served that prick even when you didn't feel him. And one bad night, one moment of pain would throw it all away. Satan waved his hand, and suddenly they could see more cells. Dozens of them, hundreds, all suicides. All just sitting or pacing or crying or screaming, all trapped in the endless knowledge of their mistake. Some of them been here for thousands of years, Satan said. Still just as aware, still just as regretful. Time doesn't help. Nothing helps. They'll be like this when the universe ends. and then for trillions of years after that, and then trillions more. Michael was sobbing now. I don't want this. I don't want this. Well, no shit! Then don't choose it! Satan's voice rose to a roar that shook the cavern. Don't jump off that fucking bridge! Don't throw yourself into my kingdom because you had one bad day. Suddenly, they were back in the tube carriage. The screams cut off. The heat disappeared. There were just two men sitting across from each other in a fluorescent lit train. But Michael could still smell the sulfur, could still hear the echoes of screaming in his ears, could still see that man's face, tears streaming, mouth forming. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That's what you're choosing, Satan said quietly. His sunglasses were back on. He looked human again. That's what happens if you jump. Not oblivion, not peace. That. Michael couldn't stop shaking. And before you think I'm lying, trying to trick you, I'm not. Satan's voice was flat. I'm the Prince of Lies. Yeah, but every word I've said tonight is true. Because I don't want you. I've got plenty of souls who deserve it. I don't need yours. The train began to slow. They were pulling into a station. That's Finsbury Park, Satan said. Your stop. The one you plan to get off at before heading to the bridge. He stood, straightened his suit. So here's your choice, Father Hayes. You can get off, walk to your bridge, jump, and I'll see you in about 30 seconds. Down in one of those cells where you'll spend eternity regretting it. He paused. Or you can stay on this train, ride it back, go home, sleep, wake up tomorrow, and never, ever have to see that place again. Doors open. Platform was empty. Michael couldn't move. The images were burned in his mind. The screaming, the endless regret, the man in the cell clawing at walls that would never break. I've been doing this for millennia, Satan said softly. Taking souls, watching humans, throw away paradise. He stepped toward the door, then looked back. Between you and me, your God is insufferable, self-righteous. Takes all the credit when people recover from disease I caused. Gets all the prayers, drives me mad. Grin was bitter, but he's real, and he wants you alive. And as much as I hate admitting it, you should listen to him. Why? Michael whispered. Why save me? Because every so often, I like to prove a point. Satan's grin sharpened. That even the devil has standards. That even I can see when someone doesn't belong in hell. And because... He paused. Because I remember what it was like before the fall, before the pride ruined everything. I remember heaven. And I wouldn't wish this on someone who could still have it. The doors started to close. Satan held them open with one hand. What's it gonna be, Father? Michael looked at the platform. He exited the path to the bridge, and he looked at his hands shaking, covered in cold sweat. He could still hear the screaming in his head, could still see those cells. Going home, he whispered. Satan's grin widened into something almost genuine. Brilliant! Knew you had some sense in you. Michael stood on shaking legs, but didn't move towards the doors. I believe, he said suddenly. I believe God exists. I believe heaven is real. I believe it all. I'm sorry, Michael said. He wasn't sure who he was talking to. I'm sorry I gave up. I'm sorry I stopped believing. I'm sorry about tonight. Don't apologize to me, mate. I don't care. Satan stepped back onto the platform. Save it for him. He's the one who's been waiting to hear it. The doors closed. Satan stood on the platform, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like a bloke waiting for the next train. He raised one hand in farewell. Remember what you saw tonight. His voice came through the glass, muffled but clear. Remember where you almost went. And when life gets hard again, and it will, remember that one moment of despair isn't worth the eternity of regret. The train pulled away. Michael pressed his face to the glass, watching Satan disappear into the darkness of the tunnel. Then he was alone in the carriage. Normal sounds returned. The rattle of the train, the hum of the lights, his phone buzzed. 11:52 p.m. Only 1 minute had passed. Michael pulled the note from his pocket, read it one last time, then he tore it into pieces and watched them fall to the floor. Father Michael Hayes rode the train home, and when he got there, he knelt beside his bed, something he hadn't done in 3 years, and prayed. Not because he felt anything, not because he was certain of anything except the images burned into his mind, but because he had seen hell, had seen where he would have gone, had seen the endless regret, the eternal awareness of what he'd thrown away. And because even Satan himself, the Prince of Lies, the adversary of God, had tried to save him by showing him the truth. God, Michael whispered into the darkness of his room, I'm sorry. I don't understand you. I'm still angry about Sarah. I still don't know why children suffer. But I believe you're real. I believe heaven is real. And I believe you want me alive. He paused. Help me, please. The devil had just saved the soul by telling the truth. He'd done it with a grin and a London accent, complaining about God the whole time. The irony was perfect. Protesters swarmed the vehicle. The door rattled as they thrashed against it, just as they thought there was no escape. Riot guards emerged from the prison, pressing back the mad crowd and preparing a way forward. Diane stepped from the vehicle. A single woman pushed her way desperately past the police. She screamed and pleaded for the innocence of her son, Thomas Spencer. The program thus far had been eventful, but the main event was still to come. Diane felt a surge of almost childlike excitement, butterflies in her stomach, as images of tonight's third and final crime came up on screen. What followed was a gainly and poor quality CCTV footage of a city street, presumably taken on an older camera. A young girl in her school uniform could be seen walking alone down the pavement, a child unprotected and defenseless. A black van slowly drove along the empty street, the driver deliberately stalking his unsuspecting victim. The girl only realized the danger when the vehicle pulled up alongside her and the driver's door swung open. She tried to run, but the masked man was too fast for her. The kidnapper grabbed the girl, dragged her, kicking and screaming, to the back of his van, roughly flinging her inside. There was a pause of about 10 seconds or so while he was doing God knows what to his victim before the kidnapper calmly exited the rear of the vehicle, climbed back into the cab, and drove down the road as if he hadn't a care in the world. Diane felt a cold shudder run through her, a primal fear which every mother would surely experience after witnessing such a heinous act. She glanced across at her husband and saw the same horror and anger in his eyes. This was every parent's worst nightmare, to have their child snatched away by some vile monster in broad daylight on a city street. It was so easy, too easy, for evil men intent on targeting the innocent and vulnerable. Diane couldn't even bear to imagine what that poor child had been through in those horrifying last few hours of her life. The footage ended abruptly, with the image changing to a serious-faced Mr. Anderson back in the studio, with a photo fit of the murderer set behind him. The scariest thing about this monster was that he looked so normal. White, English-born, and from a good family, a clean-cut, handsome young man with a steady job and decent prospects. Who would have guessed this individual was capable of such vile and evil acts? Still, looking at his photograph, Diane could see something in his eyes, a terrible darkness born of ruthless killer. Subject: Spencer Thomas, aged 28. Convicted of the kidnap, rape, and murder of a 14-year-old, Sally Jones. Most of us will remember the nationwide campaign to find Sally after her disappearance last March. Her body was found by ramblers buried in a shallow grave in a wooded area 5 miles from her hometown. Mr. Spencer, who has no previous convictions, was found guilty of Sally's murder by a jury of his peers following a long and complex trial. The conviction was delivered on the basis of CCTV footage and the DNA evidence collated by the police investigators. Spencer is suspected by police of involvement in the murders of a further 2 teenage girls, but investigators have insufficient evidence to bring formal charges in these cases. Mr. Spencer continues to proclaim his innocence of any crimes. However, his final appeal has been rejected by the Supreme Court, and so Thomas Spencer will face a death sentence. The bastard deserves everything he gets, Diane exclaimed, with a barely suppressed fury in her voice. In fact, a quick death is far too good for scum like him. I would rather see him suffer. Her husband did not argue, not this time. The couple watched on in eager anticipation as the automated lottery began once again. They both nearly choked on their tea when they saw the name appear on their TV screen. Diane was sure it was a mistake or a coincidence. But then her phone vibrated on the table beside her, an instant message appearing which confirmed that this was real. Bradley Anderson smiled as he made the announcement. And our final nominee today is Mrs. Diane Cooper, a 50-year-old office manager, married with 2 children. Congratulations, Mrs. Cooper! The ministry looks forward to accommodating you on the 3rd of next month, and their representatives will be in contact with you shortly, and may justice be served. Diane shook her head in disbelief. The shock had left her speechless as she stared at the television, part of her still imagining this was all some terrible dream. George shook his wife out of her shock-induced trance, grabbing her hand tightly and forcing her to look him in the eye. The look he gave her was one of grave concern. "Love, are you all right?" he asked sympathetically. For once, Diane had no answer. The television droned on as harsh reality hit home. Diane Cooper attended her appointment on the 3rd, chauffeured to the prison in the back of an armored police car. An MOJ official had explained that it was necessary for security reasons. There were plenty of extremists and fanatics who would be happy to disrupt the proceedings. So it was best not to take any chances. It was a 45-minute drive from Diane's house to the prison. She sat in silence the whole way, not speaking to the driver or her police officer escort. What was there to say on occasion such as this? George had offered to go with her today, but he'd been insufferable over the last couple of weeks, and so she had refused him. Although so, the ministry had offered her the services of a state-appointed psychiatrist, a professional whom she could speak with about her feelings. Diane had turned them down, too. What was the point? She was 100% behind the law and felt very proud to have been picked, to be given the opportunity to deliver justice with her own hands. They had told Diane she would feel guilty after the event, that it would take its toll. Many of the nominees suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after the deed was done. Diane wasn't worried about this prospect. She was stronger than that. Besides, why should she feel guilty? Thomas Spencer was pure evil and he deserved to die. But still, her stomach was in knots, her mind racing during that seemingly endless drive. It was just nerves, she supposed. They'd warned her about the protesters, but seeing them in the flesh was shocking. The hatred, the rage, their self-righteous indignation, it was sickening. The anti-death penalty fanatics mobbed the car as soon as they arrived at the prison gates, about a dozen of them slamming their hands and fists on the windows of the vehicle, screaming obscenities and making threats. For a moment, Diane feared they would be overwhelmed, but then the detachment of riot police arrived to push the protesters back. The scuffles continued for a few minutes, and several arrests were made before it was deemed safe for Diane and her police escort to exit the vehicle. "Don't worry, ma'am," the burly officer said with a smile. "We'll keep you safe." Diane wasn't so sure, but she wasn't going to let this rabble intimidate her. These religious nuts and left-wing loonies didn't know what they were talking about. With some trepidation, Diane stepped out into the pavement and was immediately surrounded by a phalanx of riot police who formed a protective shield around her. They moved forward quickly as vile protesters continued to scream abuse and insults from afar. Diane glanced across the street and was relieved to see a second group of dignified counter-protesters. Men and women from conservative groups such as Mothers for Justice and Reclaim Our Nation, organizations who backed the death penalty legislation. These people attempted to drown out the mob by shouting supportive slogans. "Good on you, Mrs. Cooper! You're doing the right thing! You're a hero, Diane!" Their words of encouragement gave her strength, but what happened next was entirely unexpected. Suddenly, their path to the prison gates was blocked by a solitary figure. A middle-aged woman, pale-faced and tired-looking, a terrible sorrow evident in her eyes. Diane noted the small framed photograph the woman held close to her breast, a dated picture of a smiling, blonde-haired boy, perhaps age 6 or 7, who spoke emotionally and quickly as surely she realized her time was limited. "Mrs. Cooper, my name is Teresa Spencer," she exclaimed. "Madam, you're blocking the path," said the lead police officer. "Please move immediately." Teresa ignored the man and continued her obviously pre-prepared speech. "This is my son, Thomas. They want you to kill him today. My boy is innocent." "Madam," interjected the officer, as he moved towards Teresa with his hands on his belt. "Madam, you are interfering with an official police operation. Remove yourself from the situation, or action will be taken." "Mrs. Cooper, please," pleaded the desperate mother. "He's a good boy and would never do the things they said. The police set him up. Please, look into your heart." "That was your last warning," screamed the police officer. He moved with speed, removing a weapon from his belt, aiming and pulling the trigger. There was a bang and a flash before Teresa Spencer's limp body fell to the ground. Diane screamed. For a terrible moment, she thought the woman had been shot, but then realized that the police officer's weapon was only a taser. Teresa's immobilized body twitched in the concrete as 2 officers moved in to make the arrest. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad pushed Diane forward as the baying protesters worked themselves up into a wild frenzy. She feared the crazed mob would lynch them all, but soon Diane and her protectors were inside the gate, entering the secure prison compound and leaving the chaos of the streets behind them. Diane was still shaking even after the heavy security gates were closed. She hadn't expected that, to be harangued by the murderer's mother. Why had they even allowed her to be here today? Wasn't appropriate, not at all. Whole practice outside had almost been too much for Diane to take, and the next few minutes passed her by in a blur. They took her to some sort of waiting room with an odd decor. Homely, yet somehow sterile, with awful piped music being played through speakers on the walls. Some time passed before they came to fetch her. Could have been minutes or hours, Diane could no longer tell. She just couldn't stop thinking about Teresa Spencer and what she'd said. Funny, but one never did think of these monsters having mothers. Teresa had pleaded for her son's life. What mother wouldn't have? Diane couldn't help but think what she would do, for David was in the same position. Teresa claimed her boy was innocent. The police had set him up. Was this possible? Diane followed the trial on television, and the evidence had been compelling. CCTV footage of the abduction, the van that was linked to Spencer, the DNA evidence taken from Sally's body. Nevertheless, it wasn't a clear-cut case. Spencer hadn't been caught red-handed, and he still protested his innocence. There was something else playing on Diane's mind, too. Assuming Spencer was guilty of Sally's murder, and Diane was nearly certain that he was, there was still the matter of his previous crimes. They suspected him of at least 2 other murders, and, in one case, the girl's body was never found. Still, Spencer proclaimed his innocence. He'd given the police no information. The location of the missing girl's body would go to the grave with him. Anne thought about the grieving family, realizing they would never be able to bury their little girl. Would never obtain closure. It made her furious to think that Spencer could get away with this. Why weren't the police allowed to torture the bastard to get the information they needed? Diane still felt this anger when a hard-faced female MOJ officer came for her. "Mrs. Cooper, my name is Miss Dempsey. It is time." Diane could have laughed, because it felt like she was the one being put to death. The government official explained the process while they walked down the brightly lit corridor, but Diane hardly listened. Her nerves were shot by this point, and the doubts were creeping in. But she had to see this through to the end. They entered a small control room, sterile, with all 3 white walls. an innocuous waste paper bin in the corner, a wall-sized, darkened glass screen at the far end, and finally, solitary, hard-backed plastic chair nailed to the floor, sitting directly in front of a single-digit control panel. "Miss Cooper, please sit down," said the decor-faced official. Diane meekly complied. "Now, madam," Miss Dempsey continued, "you have been familiarized with the termination procedure. You realize that the entire process is automated. All we need to do is push the red button on the touch screen when I tell you to do so. All very simple. Now, do you understand, Miss Cooper?" "Yes," Diane replied, her voice nearly breaking. "Now," Miss Dempsey continued, "the condemned prisoner has opted for termination by bullet. As the nominated candidate, you have the right to change your mind at this point in the proceedings. Now, do you wish to carry out the termination behind the closed screen?" Diane was very tempted. She had already been through so much trauma today, and it would be much easier to simply push a button and not have to witness the gruesome act. But no, that would be the cowardly way out. Diane knew she needed to stay strong and stick by her principles. She shook her head in the negative. "Okay," Miss Dempsey continued. "You understand this process will be recorded?" Diane looked up to the ceiling, and for the first time she saw the closed-circuit camera trained upon her. Right now, her image was being broadcast to millions of viewers throughout the country. This was the least of Diane's worries at this moment. Officials spoke at length about legislation and procedures, but Diane could no longer listen. She just wanted this to be over. Finally, the government woman stopped talking. "Okay. Are we ready to proceed?" Miss Dempsey leaned down and pushed a couple of buttons on the control panel, and suddenly the dark tinted glass in front of them turned transparent. Then Diane saw him in the flesh for the first time. Spencer was restrained upon a metal chair. His wrists, his neck, and ankles were bound, and his eyes covered by a blindfold. Diane was shocked by his physical appearance. Spencer didn't look like a ruthless killer anymore. Rather, he appeared as a pathetic and pitiful figure, his body shaking and his prison uniform soiled. He whimpered in terror, tears streaming down his ghost-pale cheeks as the robot arm moved into position. Placing the .22 gun close to his temple, the official spoke into a microphone installed within the control panel. "Thomas Spencer, you have been convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Your sentence will now be carried out. Do you have any final words?" Spencer nodded his head back and forth as much as was possible given the restraints. "It's not right!" he exclaimed emotionally. "You have no right to do this! I don't deserve to die!" The MOG woman abruptly cut off the radio transmission and carefully typed a security code into the control panel. The image on the screen changed to reveal one large red button with a single word written underneath it. "Terminate." "In your own time," said Miss Dempsey. Diane hesitated. She found herself physically unable to lift her finger and push the button. It seemed like an eternity passed her by as she became paralyzed by self-doubt. In that moment, all she could think of was her family. Diane had spent her whole adult life trying to protect her children, to keep David and Sarah safe and give them both a good future. And now, here she was, about to put a bullet in the head of a man she didn't know. How had it come to this? The officials soon became frustrated with the delay, and the tensions inside that small room rose dramatically. "What if?" Diane nervously asked. "What if I don't do it?" Miss Dempsey rolled her eyes. "Well, as I've already explained, refusal to carry out your mandatory duel will place you in breach of Article 17 of the Act. You will face prosecution with a fine of up to $5,000 or a custodial sentence of up to 6 months. Diane shuddered. She already knew all of this, of course. Many nominees refused to carry out the executions, and it was very rare for anyone to go to prison. If Diane pulled out, she would likely face only minor repercussions. A slap on the wrist and a fine. But of course, she would face public humiliation and alienation from her conservative friends. Worse, the whole world would see that Diane Cooper was a hypocrite, a woman who publicly supported the death penalty, but who couldn't push the button when her time came. Miss Dempsey must have sensed Diane's moral dilemma, and for the first time she showed some compassion, touching Diane gently on her shoulder and speaking in a softer tone. "Look, Mrs. Cooper, it's only natural to have doubts, but you need to remember what this man has done. Think of the girls, of what he put them through. In the end, it was those words which saw her through. She hated Thomas Spencer with every fiber of her being and wanted him to be punished for what he'd done. She held her hand out, pausing only momentarily before punching her fist down on the button. Spencer's head was suddenly pulled backward as the restraint around his throat tightened, nearly choking him. Next, the automated gun re-aimed and then fired. There was a flash and a soft popping noise, and then the bullet penetrated Spencer's skull, spraying fragments of brain and skull against the glass. His head slumped as he took his final breath. Miss Dempsey calmly typed into the control panel and made an announcement to the camera. Life signs extinguished. Subject has been terminated. Diane stared through the glass at Spencer's lifeless body, temporarily mesmerized by what she saw, until suddenly she felt the bile rising in her throat. She jumped off her chair, darted across the room, and promptly vomited into the waste paper bin. Don't worry, Mrs. Cooper, Miss Dempsey said. That happens all the time. You did well. Diane didn't answer. She continued to kneel beside the bin, unable to look back through the glass at the lifeless body of the man she just terminated. It was only then Diane realized the truth. It wasn't about Thomas Spencer or any of the other condemned men and women. Maybe they all deserved to die, or maybe not. But what they made people like Diane do under the NJA, the government had turned them all into killers. Diane would leave this place today and would face no legal ramifications for what she'd done, but she would have to face her husband and children, her family and friends, and she would never be the same in their eyes, because now she was an executioner. And what Diane Cooper had done here today would stay with her for the rest of her life. The woman was sick once again, and the camera kept on rolling as the whole world watched on. The shadow of Spot seemed off, as in the bark. A loop of sounds like a video game approached the hideous puppet dog became visible. The body was torn apart and reconstructed, but all wrong. Thorny vines stitched across its body, holding it together. The misplaced and misshapen teeth stretched from my hand. I kept my eyes on my phone, scrolling helplessly back and forth for something I knew should be there. At that time, Wyatt started crying. It somewhat brought us back to the present moment. Checked the time as Grace rose unsteadily from the couch and to get him, and realized it was already 7:50. My shift began at 8, and I had a good 30-minute commute to work. I guess I still need to go to work. I said it like I was asking for permission. I felt guilty leaving Grace there, alone in that kind of uncertainty. I could see it on her face that she was just as scared, maybe more so. And while I got to run to work and distract myself, she had to stay here in the middle of it and try to wrap her head around whatever this was. Yeah, you better get going. We'll have to figure this all out later, she obliged, trying to calm the baby and herself at the same time. I put my arm around her and gave her another kiss on the forehead. It's gonna be alright. I realized, even in the moment, how stupid that sounded. What was even it anyway? But it was all I knew how to say. I started towards the door to the garage before I stopped and turned back towards her. You think you can go to your mom's? I don't really want you to be here. Yeah, I think I'll do that. I didn't play the radio or anything else on the drive to work that morning. I probably narrowly avoided a couple of wrecks along the way too. My mind far too preoccupied from the events of the morning. There had to be some explanation. I couldn't shake that deep chill of unease until I found it. I started to think maybe the problem was us. Had we ever even had a dog named Spot? My memories told me empathetically that certainly yes, but the whole rest of the world this morning shouted no. Maybe Grace and I had just both dreamt him up somehow. Maybe we'd completely lost it. Got to work about half an hour late that morning. My new boss naturally wanted some reason for this, but I wasn't about to sit there and tell her about our disappearing dog and that my best guess for what happened was that me and my wife were insane. I just said my alarm didn't go off and said it wouldn't happen again. I got a disapproving look, but I couldn't bring myself to care after the morning I'd had. Rest of the workday didn't go much better. Couldn't bring myself to focus on anything pertaining to work. Instead, I spent the morning texting back and forth with Grace. I was so worried about her, even though I didn't know exactly what I was worried would happen. A few hours into my shift, I got a call from her and excused myself to the break room. She sounded hysterical. "Daddy, she doesn't remember!" Her voice came through frantically as soon as I answered the call. "What? Who?" I stuttered out. "My mom! She doesn't remember Spot!" I felt my stomach drop. We'd gotten the dog from Grace's mom. He'd been a stray that showed up at our house a few years ago. She'd come to our place more times than I could count. Spot had been there for every one. There's no way she couldn't remember him, and yet Grace assured me she could not. When she told Arya he'd gone missing, she started asking when we had gotten a dog. Absolutely no recollection. But there was more. Grace had gone to our apartment complex to speak with the admin. She'd become good friends in our time living there with a girl named Lindsay who worked up front. Well, when she approached Lindsay to ask about getting it let her into 322, she acted like she'd never met Grace in her life. She gave the same reaction Michael had given me the night before. 322 was vacant, and had been for a long time. "Danny, what's going on?" She was crying now. That was the million-dollar question, the only question I had rolling around in my head. I tried to reassure her as best I could, but I needed reassuring myself. She begged me to come home and be with her, and I promised I would. After we hung up, I remembered what had happened with Spot's pictures. I opened up my phone, and my fears were confirmed. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it before, but it wasn't just the pictures of Spot missing. It was everything we'd ever taken at our old place, all gone. I all at once felt sick. That oppressive cloud of fear turned to iron on my shoulders. I immediately called in sick and went straight home, the whole time keeping a picture of Grace and Wyatt on my phone. I spent probably 90% of the drive looking at it instead of the road. I was terrified now. Spot wasn't an isolated event. He wasn't even the first. My life was being wiped away, expunged from history, and I had no idea how or why, or how to stop it. It's a fear I can't begin to describe. I made it home to Grace and sprinted to throw my arms around her and our son. I've only cried in front of her a handful of times, but this time it felt more than warranted. Rest of the day felt both like a blur and endless. We sat at home paralyzed by horrified and racing minds. Occasionally one of us would speak up to the other, but the conversations were always short. 1,000 questions rolled through my head. What was this? Could it take people? What if there were things it already took that we can't remember now? I looked at Wyatt playing innocently on the floor, blissfully unaware of the strange hell that had befallen his parents. Did we have another child? How could we ever know? Neither of us could manage to eat. Neither of us wanted to sleep. We didn't know what we would wake up to or what we would wake up without. I remember just holding Grace in our bed that night, my hands running themselves through her hair, Wyatt asleep on her chest. Both of our eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Neither of us said a word for hours. At some point, sleep must have taken me unwillingly into the night, because the next thing I remember is waking up about 2 a.m. or so, my body covered in a cold sweat. Grace and the baby were still snuggled up closely to me. A relief. Even more of a relief was the sound that had woken me. Barking. "Spot," I whispered out hopefully underneath my breath. I flipped the covers off my body and hit a deep sprint out of the room. A bad dream, I thought to myself. It had to have been one long, wild, bad dream. It had to be. Sure enough, as I rounded the corner into the living room, there he was facing me, my beautiful collie Spot, barking his loud, obnoxious bark that sounded like the world's sweetest music. I almost fell to my knees in elation. I felt myself start to laugh as I flew to the door and flung it open. "Spot! Spot, come here, boy!" I patted my thighs for him to come, holding my arms out to meet him with an embrace. But he didn't come. Instead, he stayed glued to the center of the backyard, barking away like I wasn't even there. I called again, less enthusiastically. Nothing. His bark seemed off. More specifically, it seemed unchanged, like it was on some kind of loop. Bark, bark, bark. Over and over. Same exact sound. I started to wonder why he wasn't moving. Not just why he wasn't coming to me, why he wasn't moving at all. His body was stiff, unnaturally so. Every muscle tensed at once. Only his mouth opened and shut, but even that only slightly and not completely in time with the sound of the howls. On top of it was all that unbearable, ungodly chill that smacked me in the face as I opened the door. "Spot, come here, now!" I said forcefully. The same barking looped again, over and over. Even while I spoke, even when I said his name, my stomach began to twist in knots. "Spot, here now!" My voice raised to a shout. Still no change, no movement. Took a step towards him, yelling his name again. The grass crunched beneath me, frozen. My breath quickly grew short. I took 2 more. My breath turned to vapor in front of my eyes. Spot remained motionless. 2 more steps. My body shook from frost and from fear. I was close enough to reach out to touch him, and I almost did, but I was also close enough to see him. "What the hell is this?" I gasped out, recoiling away from the abomination in front of me so hard that I fell to the ground. The night had been so dark I had only been able to see and make out a little more than his figure from the back door. Now, only a few feet away from him, my eyes were more adjusted to the darkness. I could clearly see this was not my dog. He was a horrid mismatch of hair and flesh and teeth, all mixed and morphed together back into a crude shape of a dog, with all parts misplaced, limbs, ears, eyes, all juttering out from random points, contorted and broken to fit their mold, stitched together with a lace of thick, thorny tendrils weaving their way across almost every inch of his body. They were black as the night, like someone had dipped barbed wire into motor oil. Another likewise, they seemed to dig into his skin wherever their thorns were present. At various points they drove into him and erupted out of him, like they had grown and twisted together with his internals. Snaking vines trailed off behind him, behind the fence line and into the forest. I tried to follow them with my eyes to their source, but lost them in the darkness and the brush. The barking loop was still loud, but now I could tell it wasn't this dreadful rocket of dog parts making it. No, that was just the puppet. The sound was actually emanating from off in the woods, from wherever those tendrils led off to. Part of me wanted to continue on, wanted to confront this monstrosity hiding behind the imitation Spot and get some kind of answer, even if it killed me. That part was small, loud but small. The vast majority of my mind and body were petrified from what I was seeing, and pleaded with my nerves to get me the hell out of there. Just as I began scrambling to my feet to run back inside, I heard a whimper. It was the puppet, whimpering softly in pain. I watched as the only eye on its face rolled around in its head until the pupil could be seen. Was it still him? I hope to God it wasn't. I felt a sudden urge, a strong and violent draw to the creature. Maybe to help it, but more so just to touch it. Before I could even think, almost by reflex, I had laid my hand on one of those dark veins and instantly knew I had made a terrible mistake. Spot's eyes rolled back in his head, lurching towards my hand at once. Twisted fangs that had been plugged haphazardly into his mouth, bared to sink into my skin. I pulled away just in time, narrowly dodging the strike. Instantly, I began to run faster than I ever had back towards the house. The puppet, Spot, suddenly became animated, convulsing and pulling against his restraints, trying to break free with intent to maul me. The barbs dug sharply into his skin as he lurched back and forth against their tangled mesh. I slammed the door shut and didn't stop running. I stormed into the bedroom and into the closet, waking both Grace and Wyatt. Grace begged to know what was happening, but my adrenaline wouldn't allow me to answer her. I emerged with my .30-06 and charged back to the yard, ready to meet the beast. Instead, there was nothing, only our empty backyard, lit clearly by the moon and stars. "Daniel, what's going on?" Grace came around the corner on the verge of tears. "Just go back to bed," I whispered, my eyes not leaving the barren plot of grass for a second. "What? You've got to tell me." "Just go back to bed, Grace. Go to bed. You don't want to know." "I'm not going to do that. I can't leave you right now." Took a long breath and sat down on the couch, leaving a seat open for her. She took a seat, and we sat there for a while without a word while she rocked Wyatt back to sleep. Then I started to explain what I'd seen, about Spot, about the thing in the woods, about how the puppet had tried to bite me. I showed her my hand where I grabbed one of the tendrils. A large red blister had formed across my palm, burning like hell. Frostbite. We stayed up the rest of the night, keeping watch from the couch. Every light in the house was switched on. I wrapped my hand and kept it on the gun. This wasn't some strange happening. There was something out there, something malevolent, something that was feeding on our life, taking it from us. In a weird way, it brought me a little fleeting comfort. Finally knowing something. I just wish that something hadn't been so terrifying. Later that morning, a couple hours after the sun came up, I made a phone call. To you. I couldn't understand why Grace and I were the only ones who could remember Spot on our apartment. Someone out there had to remember with us. You had been with us all weekend. You were the last person to talk to us, really, before all of this had started. If there was anyone besides us, it would be you. I didn't go into it all on the phone, just said I needed you and that it was urgent. You came over right away. When you got to the house, I sat you down on the couch and just went straight into it. "Do you remember helping us move this weekend?" I asked. "Yeah, why?" A little glimmer of hope lit in my eyes. "You did? So you remember the apartment? At Shady Oaks? You remember I lived there? Do you remember our dog, Spot?" Must have sounded frantic. You were the first sign of optimism I'd had in so long. It was short-lived, though. Saw in your face just like I'd seen in Michael's. Like I'm sure Grace had seen in her mother and in Lindsay. You didn't remember. You couldn't remember. You sounded so frustrated that you couldn't remember where we'd moved all of our stuff from only a few days ago. You said you didn't know about any dog. You hadn't ever been over to my place since me and Grace moved to Houston. You've been there hundreds of times. Collapsed next to you on the couch. It was a gut punch knowing that we really were alone. At least you knew there was something wrong. Even though you had no clue to what extent. You knew we had moved a bunch of stuff from somewhere. You knew you should definitely be able to tell from where, but couldn't. Look, man, I don't know why I can't tell you, but I can't. Is that why you called me over here? You think I got dementia or something? It's just a blank. Oh, no. You're not alone in this. Nobody can remember it. That's the thing. It's just me and Grace. Started to tell you everything. All the stuff missing, the people at the apartment complex, even the hideous creature I'd seen a few hours earlier. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I'd spent the last couple of hours hoping and praying that I was. When I'd finished, you'd sat there in stunned silence, mouth agape. I guess I couldn't have expected anything more. The whole house rang quiet, save for the sound of Wyatt's quiet cooing coming from his room and Grace opening the dryer. I mean, Danny, buddy, I don't know what you want me to say. Is this supposed to be some kind of out-of-season April Fool's joke? He finally scoffed. I know what it sounds like. I just had to tell someone, man. I'm losing it. I'd say you're already there, bro. I mean, did you just hear yourself? While you were speaking, I thought I heard the sound of metal clinking coming from over near the baby's room, like keys. You know, there's something up. Why can't you remember Saturday? We spent all day moving back and forth. Why can you only remember half the trips? Look at my hand. I reached out to show you the palm, a numb black stripe cutting across the skin. Where do you think I got frostbite in Texas in the middle of August? Yeah, it's weird, it's strange, I'll give you that. I definitely heard keys. I heard Wyatt's cooing turn into a giggle. God, why didn't I shut up? Why didn't I go check? I was so wound up that maybe I could convince you, but why couldn't I go check? But it's gonna take you a little bit for me to jump from that to devil dogs in your backyard and ice vine monsters stealing your car keys. Ben, you're the only person I know to ask. We need help, man. Just pretend for a second it's true. What could you think to do? I mean, I'm worried sick right now, but Grace and Wyatt. Saw your face change. That look, that damned, dreaded look came back, and my stomach turned so violently I almost hit the ground. I'm slammed to a halt, and I begged and prayed you wouldn't say what I knew you were about to say. Who's Wyatt? Grace's scream ripped through the house and through my soul. I sprinted over to her, to the floor in front of his bedroom door. My eyes confirmed my worst fears. Crib was gone. His toys were gone. Our boy was gone. Tears rushed to flood my eyes, blurring my vision of the empty, blank room that had never been my son's. What kind of words could I string together to give you even the tiniest glimpse of that sorrow? I don't think they exist in any language known to man, and if they did, I don't have the composure to write them here. Just know that it is more crushing, more eviscerating than you could ever possibly imagine. That was the beginning of the end. There was nothing more to do after that. You slipped out at some point. I don't blame you. After all, I just said to you that, and then you sit and watch as we melt into hysterics over a vacant room in our house. I'd probably leave too. I wish I could have. I wish I could have been anywhere but in that house in that moment. I didn't know if I've been able to leave it. I think most of me is still back there. Grace remained in shock, a husk of a woman. For the second day in a row, we didn't eat. We didn't drink. We didn't talk. Barricaded us in our bedroom. I knew what would be coming when the sun set. It started around 11 or so. Hell can't be much worse than what we experienced that night. Listening to a distorted track of our son's cries and laughs echo through the house, just on the other side of our door. I'd seen the horrible thing it made of Spot. I couldn't bear to imagine, let alone see what it had done tonight. Grace was hysterical. She needed to go to him, to whatever was pretending to be him. I had to hold her down, physically keep her from leaping out of that door. She wouldn't stop screaming, stop clawing me. It took all my strength to keep her pinned, strength that couldn't hold her for a whole night. At some point, she hit me over the head with something. I didn't know what. I just remember waking up on the bedroom floor to sunlight and silence. Alone. So completely alone. The wound she must have given me was gone, as was all of our pictures off the walls, her dresser, her clothes, everything. I sat there and wept for a long time, hours, maybe the whole day. I knew I couldn't sit there any longer. I couldn't be there at nightfall. It'd be over. I had no strength left to fight the pull it would have over me. I left just before sunset with whatever cash I could find. I wouldn't be back. I found a motel outside of town. Didn't expect to sleep, but I knew I'd at least be safe for a night. I'd at least be spared those awful terrors. That was an assumption I had. Don't know why. Maybe because it all started when we first moved into the new house. I just assumed if I left, it wouldn't follow me. That assumption lasted all of 3 hours. "Danny, please, let me in. It's so cold out." I could hear her voice through the heavy iron motel door. It sounded like she was gargling water and trying to speak at the same time. Loud, piercing scratches would come in between her speaking, like it was trying to claw through the door. Threw my pillow over my head, trying to drown out the noise. It didn't work. Fought like hell to not open that door. Each time her voice came through, it came through clearer and clearer. It was learning, getting better, becoming more like her. I knew I wouldn't last. I made it through the first night, but it would be back again, and I wouldn't last. I called you earlier tonight. I was holding on to some small, resilient delusion gasp of hope that you hadn't forgotten her. You couldn't have forgotten her. All the days you and Anne have spent with us, all the times she's watched the girls. You were the best man in our wedding. For Christ's sake, she couldn't just have gone like that. Our lives have been too intertwined. You may have forgotten everything else, but not Grace. You couldn't forget Grace. You had to remember. When you picked up the phone, you asked who was calling, and my last gasp was trampled. "It's Danny," I answered. "Danny?" Your voice was heavy with disbelief and excitement. "Is it really you?" I stayed quiet on the other end of the line. You hadn't talked to me in years, you said. Finally came to terms with reality at that moment. I realized that all the fight I'd put up the last 2 nights had been for nothing. The man I'd been, the person I was, the things I loved, all of it was gone. All that remained was a tearful, woeful stranger, a man I did not and could not recognize, and one that had no place in this strange world I'd never lived in. I was already dead. You asked how I've been, what I've been up to. I told you. Told you about this amazing girl named Grace I'd met at school. How she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on. Told you about how we'd gotten married. How we had a 1-year-old boy named Wyatt. He was the spitting image of Dad. Told you about my new job and the new house we bought. And how Grace was so excited to host. And how you should bring the family over sometime. It was all a lie. And it was all true. And it was all beautiful. You asked me at the end of the call why I was crying. I couldn't give you an answer. I just said I love you, and that we'd see you soon, and hung up. I've been thinking a lot about stories since our phone call. For a minute. Well, I got to tell you about them. Grace and Wyatt were real again. They were alive again. That's when I knew I was going to write this email to you, Ben. Tonight, I'm going to join my family. I don't know what waits for me after that. I don't know what non-existence looks like, but I know that if you'll do me a favor, if you'll write this down in your own handwriting, I'll go on living. Before I left the house, I found a few love letters I'd written to Grace. We were dating, still intact. Of course, the girl they were to wasn't real. She didn't exist, but I'd still written them and they were still here. That gives me some hope. If you'll please do this for me, Ben, I'll go on living. It'll be as a character in a fiction, but I'll go on living. I love you so much, man. I'm sorry you can't remember all the good times we had. If you're reading this back, however long from now, thank you. Maybe somehow I'll see you again one day. If not, I hope you enjoyed the story. Love you forever. Your little brother, Danny. Found this scrawled down in an old notebook while I was doing some spring cleaning. I'm not really a writer, and I definitely don't remember writing this. I don't know what to make of it. I've never had a brother. I don't know anyone named Danny. I've read it probably 5 times the last 2 days. Kept looking at those names, Anne and the girls. I don't recognize them. This house feels so much more empty than it did before I read this. Empty and cold.
The ceiling caved in, locking me down completely. Desperately attempted to inch forward, my feet pushing off, trying to drag myself with my hands. Stuck. Finger, multiple of them. I yelled as the hand clamped down on my lower calf. I shook my limbs fiercely, trying to get it off me, trying to break free. It held on unrelentingly.
Was that audio real? I didn't even know the person on the phone. Looking at it from a distance, they're just all statistics to you. Numbers to write down on a clipboard for insurance or legal cases. I had never been so up close and personal with the victims before. Never heard their voices. And heard, for the first time, what was going on in that factory while the fires raged. I couldn't help but imagine myself in their shoes. What thoughts would be running through my head? Would I be able to handle the pain this individual had experienced in his last moments? I shook myself out of it as I heard the brakes beneath the car. We emerged again, but not into a station like we had before. Everything outside was still as dark as the tunnel we had just shot out of. Even as the doors opened, I saw nothing, just the elevated tracks we were positioned on. I backed up slowly for obvious reasons, not wanting to be anywhere near the edge, but it appeared I didn't have a choice in the matter, because just as I reached my seat, a loud explosion tore up the space beside me. I was tossed forward as the train tilted vigorously on its side from the force, sending me sailing through the car and out the door. Spastically flailed my arms out in all directions in a panicked attempt to break my fall, and then I landed. I swear I felt the bones of my forearms snap and ram themselves up through my elbow as my hands impacted the metal floor. I threw up from the shock of the pain as I rolled continuously, the world becoming a massive blur to me. Once I came to a stop, I lay on my back, staring at the tall, rust-colored ceiling, trying to catch my breath. My arms, as well as the rest of my body, were still throbbing. I dared to slowly turn my head over my limbs as I desperately tried to hold in more bile from working its way up from my stomach. But they seemed fine. They didn't even look broken. That couldn't be. I swore I heard those bones shatter. I felt that forearm ram itself out of my skin. But I saw none of that. In fact, I could move both arms just fine. It still hurt like hell, but even that was beginning to wear off now. I stood up weakly, still dazed at what had just occurred and how I just seemed to be okay after a horrid fall like that. And that's when I heard the roar of a wall of flames erupting from behind me with renewed strength. My head snapped back at the furor that had been unleashed. Sheets of track, jagged and crooked, twisting and shooting off in different directions like the scattered corpse, came tumbling down from above the supports. The inferno formed a mermation as it ripped side to side, front to back, as if carried by some invisible draft. It shot forward towards me, the blistering heat submerging my face as it enveloped what was left of the thick, rustling railing. The blaze began to swirl, shooting up towards the ceiling and capturing the decayed infrastructure in its violent grasp. The smell of smoke attacked my nostrils as I was blasted from my side with a burning wind so intense that I had to make a serious effort to ground myself to keep from falling. And then, with one final whoosh, it disappeared from the ground up, leaving nothing behind. New eerie silence crept over me as I was left alone in the overwhelming darkness, broken only by the occasional groans of what sounded like some unseen, heavy metal settling or colliding with something off in the distance, echoing throughout the entire hall. I didn't dare myself to move. Crossed my arms close to my chest and looked around, but I could not see anything now. I knew I wasn't going to make any progress simply standing here until I starved, so I made the only choice I could have. I picked a direction, started walking, choosing to just continue forward, listening to the low howls of what appeared to be wind as it blew through the empty factory. A couple minutes passed, and then I heard something. It was far off in the distance, barely audible at first. A few rhythmic taps that sounded above the ambience. I stopped. So did it. However, when I kept moving, it resumed, melting with the sound of my feet. Stopped and listened again. I initially thought it was just the drip of water, but no, it wasn't that. Water doesn't just stop and resume on a dime. It doesn't sound this unnatural. I must have spun around multiple times trying to pinpoint what I had heard while trying to make sure not to lose my orientation. It didn't make itself audible again, however, not until I prepared to begin walking again. That's when I heard it, louder than ever. It was a distinct, rapid slapping sound, as if something soft, smooth, and wet were impacting the metal floor beneath it, quickly, over and over again. The sound of bare footsteps racing towards me. I leapt into action, sprinting with all my might, my lungs crying out in agony, but I ignored them. Those feet were gaining on me, belonging to a body I could not and did not want to see. In the distance, a bright white light emerged that scorched my unadjusted eyes. I had to dart my head toward the floor to stop it from tearing through my retinas. A loud snap sounded ahead of me. I watched as the glow became blocked by sheets of jagged metal supports and insulation that burned with a crackling fire raining down from the ceiling. I stopped and held my ears shut as they let loose a high-pitched shriek upon scraping into the floor. When I looked up, I saw my path forward entirely walled off with burning rubble and ruin. It circled me, providing no way out, all except for one small hole directly in front. It was nowhere near big enough to walk through, and where I stood, I debated if I could even crawl my way to the other side. There was no choice but to try, however. Whatever was following me, seemingly now aware of my predicament, had picked up its pace. I practically drove into the hole, the exposed spikes and pieces of rusty metal tearing into my skin as I weaved into the enclosure. I forced my way through despite the pain. The material around me closed in far too tight for me to crawl, causing me to extend my arms out ahead of me and scooch forward, using exposed pieces of the ceiling, which were now jutting out of the floor, as leverage to push off with my feet. Felt like the entire place climbed about 10 degrees in the span of a couple seconds. I could feel my face going red as sweat poured out of every pore in my body, the clothes sticking to my skin as they were wrenched in between the walls, squeezing me down from all sides. My lungs were crushed, forced into a deep compression that they would never expand from. Inhaling was painful, and every time I managed, all I could draw in was a weak puff of blazing air that seared my throat as it forced its way down, raising the sweltering heat even more. The light seemed so close. I just had to keep moving, but it became more of a struggle the further I got. The progress I was making was becoming less and less. A law of diminishing returns so harsh it would ensure I never reached my destination. I was opening new gashes on my arms and my legs left and right. I could feel the blood draining from my body. Suddenly, everything around me shifted and the ceiling caved in the last millimeter or so that it had, locking me down completely. I began to panic as I desperately attempted to inch forward, put all my weight into my feet and pushed, trying to drag myself with my hands. But no matter how much strength or force I put into the movements, I was stuck. I became more spastic, desperate. I was losing breath with each inhale I tried. "Please!" I heard a faint whisper coming from somewhere behind me. It was pained and desperate, as if using its last breath to beg for help. "The fire's getting closer! Oh, God!" I jumped, crashing my head into the ceiling, my vision growing blurry as I felt a crimson begin to flow down my face. Something had brushed my leg. It came again, this time slowly sliding down the limb's length. Its texture was rough, flaking, failing sheet of skin that I could feel even through the fabric of my pants. Finger, multiple of them. I yelped as the hand clamped down on my lower calf. I shook my limbs fiercely, trying to get it off of me, trying to break free, but it held on unrelentingly. "Please, we need help!" The debris shifted again, and I heard the distinct sound of bone cracking as it let go. A shriek of suffering filled the tunnel as I finally broke free, pulling myself desperately, making progress inch by inch until finally the light fully enveloped me, and I fell forward, colliding with the ground and tumbling only a few moments later. I got up on my hands and knees, breathing heavily on the very familiar dark rubber flooring. I stopped, slowly turning toward the seats that lined the walls as the roar of wheels speeding down the metal track filled my ears. I stood up immediately, rubbing different areas of my body, checking myself for injuries. There was nothing. As always, the hooded figure sat at the far end of the car. However, this time his head was still obscured by his cloak, slightly tilted towards me as if he was watching me with a peculiar interest. And I just couldn't hold it back anymore. A surge of anger bubbled up from deep below, and I yelled, What? I demanded. The hell do you want from me? Tears began streaming down my eyes. I knew that provoking this person probably wouldn't end well for me, but at this point, I had come to terms with the fact that I was never getting out of this situation anyway, and if nothing else, I at least wanted answers. What was happening? Why me? Cloaked figure didn't respond at first, but soon I saw his chest begin to heave up and down. It was convulsive, jerky, snapping between the two positions incessantly. It grew in intensity as the head began to drift up and down. Finally, I heard what appeared to be small breaths escaping his lips. They immediately cut to sharp inhales before I heard the tone of his vocals. Deep, parched, dry, cracking laughter. It started gently at first, before intensifying and harmonizing with the click of the wheels. We exited the tunnel and found ourselves above ground for the first time since all of this had begun. I turned and stared out the windows of the door. The sky was blanketed with a layer of light gray clouds. The sky of rain sheets pelting the train's metal exterior formed a symphony with the thunder and lightning that struck through the skies above. We appeared to be in the middle of nowhere, nothing but trees and a washed-out, lifeless expanse. Train bit the brakes again. The figure laughed hysterically as we descended to a halt, where the growth finally led up into a broad clearing. I stared wide-eyed as the doors in front of me opened. Outside lay a field of 20 graves, all already covered up and filled in except for one. Surrounding the forwardmost center was a group of people, their faces obscured with black. They each held a candle with a flame that appeared purely white in the washed-out color grading, seemingly unaffected by the rain dropping from the skies above. They didn't even notice me, never turning their heads, never distracted from what they had lost. The coffin was being lowered into the ground. I tried my hardest to look at who was being buried, but the name, it was indecipherable. I couldn't even begin to make out the text scrawled on the rock. Another nameless individual. The train doors slammed shut, and I turned around and jumped at seeing the hooded one now standing just a few inches behind me. I didn't know when he moved, but now he was right here. His hood had been completely removed, revealing a wrinkly, dark, dirty, burnt face. Loose strands of silver hair wavered off the top of his head in threads, barely holding on for dear life. And his smile, oh God, his smile, bleeding, cracked lips with yellow teeth, a curve that stretched all the way to the bottom of his eyes that contained nothing but pure, unfiltered blackness. He tilted his head to the side, and I heard the popping of muscle and the cracking of old flesh as he did so. Then he slowly moved one shaky hand upwards, pointing at something behind me. I turned around and saw what he wanted me to see. Above my head was a list of stops. I scanned through each one by one, and recognized them immediately. My local subway station, that first stop, all the way to now, and finally, coming up next, end of the line. My stomach dropped, and the train seemed to pick up speed as we rushed into the dark walls of another tube. I shook my head, the tears rolling out of my eyes. As I turned around, the old man began laughing again. He was beyond hysterical, and I could only watch, desperation contorting my face as he began to shake violently, streams of blood draining from his eyes. This was all my fault. I could see that now. It had been abundantly evident this entire time. But now, at the very end, I finally saw it for myself. And so, I did the only thing I could do. I got on my knees, crying and begging. I apologized profusely for everything I had caused and done, and surprisingly, I meant it. I wrung my hands together, closed my eyes, and begged for forgiveness. I didn't expect to be heard, but I wanted him to know that I regretted everything, that I knew I deserved what was coming, and to make it clear that I would be better if I had the chance to do it all over again. And then out of nowhere, we came to a violent stop, and Jolt knocked me over onto the floor. I was forced to open my eyes as I extended my hands forward to catch myself. I looked around, shaking. The old man was gone. The car was full. People were everywhere, lounging on seats, distracted by their phones or standing around holding the guardrails, going about their daily business as if nothing had happened. A lot of them were staring at me, looks of confusion imprinted onto their faces, as if was some sort of alien. I stood up, unsure of my surroundings, and practically leapt out of my skin when the doors opened behind me. I turned around and was greeted by a crowded platform as people from inside the train impatiently squeezed past me to get out. The stop I knew very well, my home station. I timidly stepped out onto the yellow line and observed what looked to be typical rush hour traffic. My hand found my pocket. I felt something rectangular. My phone. I immediately pulled it out, revealing the pristine, undamaged touchscreen. I turned it on, and the display came to life. I nearly gasped when I discovered what was written on top. Sunday, May 11th, 8:03. 3 days before the explosion. I brought my hand to my mouth and began to laugh. I don't know why. I don't see how, but somehow I had been given precisely what I asked for. I bolted out of the station and made a series of phone calls. As soon as I reached my apartment, I ordered the factory to be closed temporarily and to put all employees on paid leave. At the same time, we brought in investigative and maintenance crews to go through the entire facility, update the equipment, and bring it up to safety standards. I must have spent millions and millions, but I didn't care anymore. It needed to be done. The factory is still closed, and I don't know how long it will be until it reopens. Depends entirely on how long everything takes. It's a big job. A lot of stuff that was left to rot for years is finally getting replaced. I'm losing money each day as I need to continue to pay my workers. It doesn't bother me. I have the funds to do it, and preventing the disaster that happened before is far more critical. I had a conversation with the union leader the other day. He was surprised by my sudden change of heart. I can't be the person I once was. Not anymore. Maintenance workers found the loose electrical wiring that had sparked and set off the chemicals today. The press described it as a close call that was narrowly avoided. I'm being hailed as a hero now. We all know that's not true. We all know what it took for me to change. The memory of it, of what I did, still lingers in my head at night. It haunts me when I go to bed, and that's the point. I will need that eternal reminder to keep me on straight and narrow and show me what could happen if I ever turn on my promise. Speaking of which, I want to say one more thing before I part ways with you. I can see it now, the train, I mean. I saw it for the first time again while walking on the metro on May 12th. I was scared at first. I didn't understand what it was doing here. I was doing everything right, wasn't I? Why had it come back for me so soon? And then I realized it wasn't here for me. I saw that clearly as I watched someone else, a burly guy, seemingly in his 40s, board the train before me, locked into his phone just like I was. I could only look on in half pity as the door slammed shut behind him. I finally looked up in surprise. The train pulled out of the station with the strength I had now grown used to, and I watched through the windows as the cloaked man sitting in his typical seat passed by me. I swear he was looking back at me, smiling. The bull's tail swung back and forth in the sunlight. Atop its shoulders, a goat's head, 2 horns dug into its skull, riding to the sky as the gray bone turned like ivory in the light. The creature's pupils were perfect rectangles, separated by its long snout and a flashing in amber. My body froze as it stared at me. It crossed its hooves, fleshy hands gripping the dark brown calves. Several days have passed before I could venture into those woods again. They no longer seemed as homely as they had once. The bright, shining rays of light would bounce between the leaves, now cackled in hues of dark gray that seemed to sharply cut from branch to branch. Harsh wind was blowing out of them at all times of the day, and at night it sent an ominous whistle that made me shiver as I relieved myself at the edge. And the rain never stopped. Every day I expected it to part. Every day I was disappointed. For the next few days, the only thing that broke the monotony was the return of that old dog. Saw him first before the storm came. Never expected to see him again. Old, skinny, black, and blind. He had droopy ears and a long, dark snout with white bristles at the tip fitting for his age. One of his eyes was scarred, and the other white with cataracts. The dog walked with a limp, quite efficiently, as one would expect someone who has had an injury for a while would. His ribs gauntly poked from his sides, and I could only wonder how such a poor, decrepit thing managed to survive. First time staring through my glass, I only watched him. Roamed across the grass, his nose sniffing at the ground, idly chasing some invisible scent, like an ant following a false trail. He walked in circles, on and off the gravel, until I grew tired of watching the scene and stood up. I opened the melted icebox underneath my counter and retrieved some smoked hair wrapped in plastic. But when I turned to open the door, he was gone. I stepped outside to scan for him, and down the road, I saw him padding along, nose to the ground and sniffing away at the dirt as he limped down the path. That was the last time I had felt the warmth of the sun calling for him. But here, in the middle of this never-ending storm, he returned. It was quicker this time, no need for my last hair. If he left, the door opened with a loud creak, and there he was, roaming in a circle outside of my cabin. For a moment I smiled. Normalcy at last. "Hey," I called, in as friendly a tone as I could muster. Now his body was soaked with water, dripping to the floor like udders from a cow. The only long fur he had was on his chin, matting his beard that looked as if he had just dunked it into a water bowl. I called again, but he made no attempt at responding. He continued to roam. One more circle, sniffing so close to the gravel I worried he had been inhaling rocks. So I just watched him, not like there was anything better to do with my phone dead. Finally, I grew frustrated. Was he deaf? "Hey, come on!" This time I patted my leg afterwards. His head immediately turned, and I began to nonchalantly limp towards the steps. Not so much as sparing me a glance, as his nose continued to smell the ground. I stepped outside, figuring I would have to carry him up the steps, but just as idly as he began to walk towards me, he climbed them, barely putting any weight on the left paw that ailed him as he reached the top. The door was open, but he stopped at the window next to it, sniffing the plank under it with intention. I tilted my head as he did the same, and then he turned and limped on inside. Figuring it was not one much for conversations, I came through and latched the door shut after him. Quickly found his way to the stove, slinking his skinny torso between the legs of my chair, lying down with his tail and thigh next to the softly burning flames. He made no sign that I expected from other dogs who found a comfortable spot, simply closing his eyes and going still. I retrieved one of the few remaining strips of hair I had left from before my last encounter in the woods. Didn't react as I approached him, placing it at his nose. His eye opened, and I could see the clouds of white up close. Like a soft fog, they obscured anything resembling a pupil, and I found myself overcome with pity at the thought of such a creature. How horrible it must be to lose your grip on vision and not be able to know what was happening. He sniffed once at the strip, and I grinned wide, happy to share with my new neighbor his first meal in what I assumed was a long time. Instead, he outstretched his left paw, touching the strip of jerky with calloused paws. His nails were dark and blunt, long and crooked, and there was some kind of crimson coming from between his pads. I knelt down and looked closer. Blood, old, but not very, coming from the middle of his paw. I looked at the others. His back legs looked fine, but I could not see his right, being folded against his chest. I reached out, and he did not react, so I gripped his skinny arm gently and stretched it out. Blood again. What the hell? A soft splatter of crimson stained the inner sides of his pad and matted the soft fur. Pushed on his paw gently to get a better look, and once again he did not react. There was some wound between them. I couldn't possibly tell what in the low light. So instead I got some antibacterial wipes out from my shelf, wiping both paws clean as his eyes closed and he remained motionless. After I was done, I waved the strip of jerky in front of his nose again, which he sniffed, opened his eyes, and closed them once more. Didn't pant, didn't whine, didn't even breathe loud enough to hear over the crackling of the stove. I spent a long while looking at him as I stripped and got into bed. Motionless, he slept, while I tossed and turned, assaulted by the breaking of wood lost to flames and the patter of the storm through my window that seemed to grow only louder and quieter it got. When sleep finally found me, it only made me feel worse. Vines, horns, and eyes, roots coiled around my throat, tasting of iron and spores. It's all I dreamed of. The beast didn't make a noise until the next morning. Shuffling, rifling, I opened my eyes groggily. The canvas bag I left at the door. At first I was surprised. Why is that still there? Then I blinked again and adjusted my eyes. There he was, that beast, making the first noise I ever heard from his lips as he crunched away on my chandeliers. I exhaled through my nose, throwing my head back onto the pillow and looking up at the clouds through the fogged window. There was a seeping cold flowing flatly through the small lift that opened it. It made me shiver and sent me up into the sitting position. As I watched the dog turn his snout left and right, brushing away the canvas to reach further into the bag. I sighed. Happily, he was finally eating. But that wouldn't do for me. The woods called for me again, not out of malcontentious longing, but because of a pain in my stomach. What's left of the hares were gone, and there may very well be several waiting for me on the snares I laced along the trail. So the routine was set, the die was cast, and the time to overcome my fears of trees and moss had come. A fresh dip into my bags of clothing heralded my departure. Fresh jacket, fresh pants, fresh sweater, spoiled muddy boots. For now, my old pair of sneakers will have to do. I checked my phone. Off, but charging at 2%. Hopefully. The moment I opened the door, that gale hit me once again. A gust of wind nearly folded my wrist back as I struggled, and then it turned gentle, calming. Ambient, cool wisps brushed against my cheek and blew strands of hair behind me as I stepped down my stairs. The beast was behind me. He lumbered down them as well, his nose on the ground, as he resumed what I figured was his favorite activity. I wondered if he'll go back to walking in circles, but for now I figured the freedom of choice was all I could afford him. So I didn't look back as I left the door open, leaving him to his whims. Yet instead, he followed. Found my pace shortened as I neared the trees. They looked taller, demanding rugged boughs and branches that would softly curve downward to envelop the floor now looked like twisted arms suffocating the light from the ground. The ground was dead, devoid, drowning. The grim wind that greeted me when I opened my door was pouring out of it like a floodgate, and every few minutes seemed to recall and inhale that warm breeze coming from out of its grasp back in. I glanced behind me as I stood in the tree line. 5 feet from me, the beast had stopped. He was looking, that cloudy eye staring me down like a blizzard on the horizon. I froze, trying to stay calm. How did he know how tall I was to look for me directly in the eye? I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. My tongue caught in my throat and I swallowed a half smile. "You're not coming then?" The beast turned, putting his head low until his nose touched the grass. He sniffed his way back to the gravel, tracing circles as I disappeared into the pines. Despite the canopy, the storm felt harsher here. Droplets of water seemed to coagulate into deeper prospects that dripped slimily from the tips of bows, hitting the ground with heavy thuds that drowned out the noise of the woods. Every step was wet, soggy, and required my full conscience in order to pull through the next. A droplet splayed my cheek as I cleared a line of brush, finding my trail at last as I began to follow it down through the mist. The packed dirt in front of me was a thin array of mud, winding as it drooped into a steep incline before flattening out, while armies of pines dangled over, covering the sky with sharp green needles that stabbed and prodded, all vying for the dominance of sunlight. They fell against my shoulders as I sidestepped my way down, the mud creasing my sneakers and making me wobble with each step. I didn't find my first snare. Two bushy roots loomed low over the trail, making a perfect tunnel for which I laced my string, but it wasn't there. I stepped over it and continued my muddy march. As I walked along, I heard the hum of the stream. It came as a slight whisper, tickling the back of my ears, but as I made my way to the next snare, I found the hum of the wash increasing louder and louder the further I got through the trail. Being in a hungry daze and so close to my second snare, I gritted my teeth and walked on, following the path that seemed to directly lead to the torrent. As the reverberation of the river increased, I found it difficult to hear any sounds of the forest as the storm surged, but there, as cleared the next pine, stood my snare, and on it a gift from the forest. A hair dangling listlessly in the wind from atop of the root, its neck cracked and head drooping palely against the snare. I approached the forest gallows cautiously. Yellow powder crusted the thing's lips, oozing like sap, and its ears scraped the black bark of the roots as it teetered back and forth. The thing's fat bottom nearly touched the ground, hanging there with its white feet turning a sickly gray, having stewed in the murky mud below the trap. Its eyes were wide open in a haze of gray and brown, no pupil visible. Beggars can't be choosers. I unceremoniously stripped my knife from my belt and cut the creature loose, stuffing it in my canvas bag with a little thought other than relief that my luck wasn't all bad. As I rested the bag against my chest, I felt the carcass against my heart, and both seemed to beat in time. But the ringing in my ears was nauseating, and I pressed on to the next snare. Hum of the river made the trail seem to vibrate, playing tricks on my eyes as I began to see it in two renditions. The vibrations made my feet numb, and the icy wind carried it up to my legs as I walked, made of jello, further and further down the path. Water fell all around me. My mind told me to leave while I was ahead, but a gnawing thought in the back of my mind convinced me that the ringing would only be worse should I head back. Yes, the stream was back where I came, and I was doing well to continue away from it. Firelight bloomed in the distance. I recognized it as I would any other day. My ears were stifled, but my eyes could see the burning rays of light through the shadows of the pines. I walked towards it, and the trail straightened into a simple path that seemed to overtake the routes that had previously dominated it. I treaded on, and then the light broke through more and more trees until confusion overtook me. I saw the chandeliers. They burned in daylight. The grass I saw through the canopy gleamed like shining topaz, and glistening rays of light ignited the canopy in beautiful rays of gold. The storm had broken ahead, and I nearly broke into a run as I realized it. The hum grew sharper, and the pines parted like a curtain. The forest seemed to separate into a perfect circle, and a glowing pond of grass and white flowers bloomed under its radiance. The mushrooms formed all around the tree line, as if holding back the tides of pine and root that encompassed everything else. And there, on a broken log in the back end of the clearing, was magic itself. Cloven hooves dug into the grass, and muscled pink legs rose above it. Its waist was covered in dark brown fur with a belt of odd hide fastened across. The chest was bare, but its shoulders folded into the same dark hair. A bull's tail swung back and forth in the sunlight, and atop its shoulder a giant goat's head. 2 horns dug into its skull, riding to the sky as the gray bone burned the ivory like the light. The creature's pupils were perfect rectangles, separated by its long snout and a flashing in amber. My body froze as it stared at me. It crossed its hooves, fleshy hands gripping the dark brown calves. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. When the thing's head tilted, it waited for me, not moving, hardly breathing. "What are you?" The creature grinned. A set of perfectly square teeth bore across all its maw. Light green tinted stains along the tips. No fangs, no front, just perfect white squares. "I am an angel." The voice was like honey, deep and floral. A breeze blew as it spoke, and the smell from the stream permeated back into my mind, while the wind carried it. The sun bristling at my nose, while rays of light burned away the downpour. It was as if I just removed a large coat. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating. Felt I could run a marathon as I took a step closer. "You don't look like an angel." "I haven't bathed." That smile again. I was so lost by the sudden vanishing of rain I had lost conscience of left to even process what I was looking at. I wiped my face and looked away. The angel's side-facing eyes strained to look directly at me, with white chalk-like bags underneath each wrinkling as it seemed to squint. I struggled for questions, even words. My mind was a cacophony of fear and wonder as I pondered such an impossible creature, but the gnawing in the back of my head assured me that there was no other cause for this creature besides divine providence. I took a step forward. "Why are you here?" "I live here. Why have I not seen you before?" "I did not want to be seen." Tears formed in my eyes. I shuddered in the light like a bug exposed to a torch. "You're not real. Feel my heart and know." I was standing next to the angel. My arm unfolded and my glove was off, trembling as I reached for it. Tremor went through my hand as I felt its heart. My palm was on his chest. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Our hearts beat in sync. A tear fell from the pit of my eye. "Why now?" I removed my hand, but the beating of the celestial still quaked. "I pitied you, human. I saved your life." "Why?" "The beast of the woods hunted you as you picked my fruit. The fault was mine." The beast of the woods, the shadows in the pines, the raven, that creature stalked from tree to tree, chasing me as I fled in horror. Left that day in a suit of mud and stupor. The raven, the angel's slit pupils, regarded me warmly. "The raven? Mine own. And the beast? Mine enemy." I mumbled nothing. An exasperation of denial and confusion as I stood next to it. The angel smiled knowingly. The stream and the trail, the mushrooms and the forest, none were mine. All were the estate of the angel. I stood in his temple, and I felt small and insignificant in his altar. My bag twitched. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you." "What will you do?" "I can return the one you love." I took a step back. The angel's eyes followed. My eyes darted across the blue sky, and I stopped to watch a billowing white cloud float far above the storm. I looked down, and the angel awaited his answer. "I have not lost anyone I love." Unblinking, the angel resounded a deep whisper. "I'm afraid you have." "Who?" "I did not see." "And how do you know?" "The beast took them." I tilted my head, and the angel did the same. He looked at me grimly, like a man would look at a dying animal. Pity. His pity filled me with dread. What had I lost? Although I was looking down on him, it was as if he stood 20 feet tall when I stared. "I haven't lost anyone." His countenance darkened, his eyes lowered, and he roughly exhaled through his snout. The angel's lips vibrated. "Then go home, Jack, and I will see you again." He stepped backwards, and another. My feet were moving on their own, my hand raised to feel the angel's heart again, but it was gone. I began to hear the rain. I turned my feet sideways to stop, but they straightened and my hips began to turn. Pines were ahead of me. The storm was pounding. I looked back, and it was all gone. My imagination? Definitely not. I began to run. My heart and my mind were shattered. The hum of the faraway river, the beating of the angel's heart still reverberated through my brain. I felt no pain as my body as I ran through the forest, dashing from tree to tree, down the path like a wild beast. I loved nothing. The corpse regarded me lifelessly. She was split in half. Seams of a small black jacket twisted unnaturally into a tangle of bright red flesh that dripped onto the wet wood. Shiny red teeth clumped with brain matter atop her shoulders. Who was she? My mind was blistered. A pounding migraine roared in my skull. I stepped inside. The room was cool and empty. For the first time in hours, it was quiet. The plastering storm halted at the door's latch, and only the shriek of the chair accosted my ears as I sat down. I sat there for some time, listening to nothing. I stared at Wood. Where was he? I looked behind me. The dog was gone, and I closed my eyes. My thoughts drifted away. Vines, horns, and slit eyes. Roots coiled around my throat, and I woke in a gasp. I fell forward, hitting my chin on flat logs as my eyes drifted to the door. I laid there for some time, thinking of all I had experienced. I could not recall which was real and which was a dream. I pictured the beast and the angel, and dead hair still on my back. I shuddered as my nails scratched at the wood. The door was red underneath. Rosa. I ran outside in a panic. The door clattered loudly behind me as I threw it open. There she was, her legs calmly laid flat towards the railing. The rest of her was in two pieces. I collapsed. Tears began to stream from my face, and my cheeks burned. My palm was covered in her blood. I placed my hand on her leg and looked for anything resembling a person I spent the entirety of my life with. Black hair, pale skin, so much blood. I sobbed, "I love you, Rosa." My words were a whimper. "I love you." I wiped my face with her blood on my fingers, my only family member in the world reduced to a vicious liquid. The rain pounded on the wooden canopy, and all I could do was sit there. There was nothing to hold. My palm clawed childishly at her pants as I wept. My other smashed the floor as hard as I could, my nails biting into the palm as I struck the ground over and over and bawled. I remembered the words from before. "I can return the one you love." The words formed in my head so vividly that I raised my eyes and my mouth went wide. The entirety of my vision was blood, a red vignette, and closed my eyes. I looked behind me. He sat in the mud, in the pathway I had walked so many times before. His knees were pointed outwards, and his two hooves fit into each other like puzzle pieces. His palms were resting upwards on his lap. Water matted his fur and darkened his skin, and his horns dripped thick tears that poured against the ground. The angel returned, but the rain persisted. I shambled down the steps, stumbling and tripping as I approached it. Salt from my eyes filled with the taste of fungus swelling my tongue. I lurched towards the angel, and like a wretched, pained animal healing to its master. The angel grinned as he looked at me. "I'm sorry, Jack." His mouth contorted into a frown. "The fault is mine." My lips furrowed, and I let out a pathetic mumble. I fell to my knees, the angel's eyes regarding me merely for a few feet apart. My bloody palm gripped mud and dirt tightly as I trembled. "Can you bring her back?" "I can." "How?" I stared for some time at the angel, and then blinked. The pines vanished. The world seemed to collapse around me. The mud and dirt and grass all drowned. I turned back, but the cabin had vanished into a sea of gray water. All around me, an endless abyss of shallow ocean, with no horizon in sight. The sky was a matte gray. The water shimmered in clouded gray light. I saw my reflection as I looked down, bloody, filthy, wretched. The dead hair lay next to me. It twitched and blinked. I saw the reflection of the angel as well. Its toothy smile shimmered in a single ray of moonlight that struck the sea. I looked up at him again, and he was the entire world. Rain pattered his horns. You need only sign. The rain stopped around us. Puddles rippled softly into the sea and curled around my knees. I stared down at my visage again and sobbed. All was quiet, and the angel looked at his as well. The silence was so deafening. It felt as if the entire world had ended. I would simply vanish like the rest. Then the water moved again. It rose from the sea, rising upward into droplets, as if the very storm had reversed itself. I watched in awe as bits of gray torrent floated all the way into the sky. Dissipating into the clouds, a pool of droplets began to congeal in front of me, rising above the ocean, formed a ball that swirled between us, and then it flattened like paper as it unfurled and took color. A sickly white hue of thin paper floated in front of my knees. Archaic, foreign black symbols stippled its flesh. My index finger began to bleed. I raised it to my eyes and saw a thin pinprick of dark crimson blood dripping into the sea. I glanced at the angel, who regarded me with a wide smile. A long black line pinned to the end of the scroll. Only I can save her. My hand trembled. Only he can save her. I was a powerless insect, the angel of the woods, come to free me from the beast. The tears of anguish began to form into tears of joy. I thought of Rosa, her laugh, her smile, the way she pushed at my chest when she was mad at me. I remembered her heartbeat from my childhood as we slept together. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. I would give anything to see her again. I would give my heart and my soul just to see her laugh. I brought her here, to the woods, and to the beast, and I would have it to atone for the sins. The angel would cleanse me. I pointed my finger forward. The blood formed a small pool between me, and I reached for the scroll. A small tint of blood splashed the bottom of the paper. Its corner shriveled in response. The blood stopped as I reached to place my print. And then my ears started to ring. Flash burned my retina, and all of reality seemed to blink in a blitz of light and sound. I felt something hit my chest. Pieces of rock or metal shredded against my jacket and through my chest as I fell onto my back into the water. I coughed and wheezed and rolled onto my side, my bleeding hand gripping my stomach. My right hand bit into the ground. For some reason, I felt dirt. I opened my eyes. There was pines and mud. My face burrowed in it. I gasped humid air as I tried desperately to make sense of my surroundings. I fell back onto my back. There, standing over me, a dark silhouette loomed, eyes wide and mouth agape, in a contortion of pure horror. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and tried to make sense of the figure. "Rosa?" I whimpered. The figure stared down at me. No, much too big to be Rosa. I knelt down, and all I could see was a scared, worried face. I had seen that face before. Something metal and cold was laid at my chest. Two large, fleshy hands reached under me, lifting me up into the sky. I laid limp against them. There was warmth in my chest, then hot pain. Two massive, bulky shoulders supported my dead weight. I looked up, saw perhaps the squarest jaw I've ever seen. "I'm sorry, Jack, His burly voice caught in his throat. "I didn't know you was behind him. I didn't know," Jonas said in a worried drawl. "What the hell was that?" A shotgun rested between my legs as he carried me. The old man was jogging down the path, his words drifting away as I dreamed. I dreamed of a boat, of clouds, and of shores. The rain pattered lightly against my face as I stared up at the clouds. It was soft, calm, and a warm breeze tickled my skin, combed my hair. I opened my eyes, truly for the first time in ages. The trees glowed brightly in the autumn haze. The sky was a foggy blue that covered the road in a plethora of pale colors. I smiled softly and looked up at Jonah. "Hang in there, buddy. We'll be there soon." I drifted my head downward and looked forward. A lone beast plodded the road ahead of us, an old blind dog, nose to the pavement, limping briskly through the warm fall rain. His nose sniffed at the ground. "You're lucky he found me, boy. He came to my door scratching and gnawing and hollering at the moment. I went outside, went right on up to the road, closed the door, and he did it again. Can you believe it?" I smiled. "Good boy." So, angels were real, and they were old dogs and old men. I'm so glad you were able to make it to the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. You could be the one that sends the channel to the moon. Don't miss the next grand adventure. So always tune in next time. Have a good one.